Ladies and gentlemen, when we think of the word psycho, what comes to mind is often a dramatic image, an individual acting out in anger, manipulation, or erratic behavior. But let us step back for a moment and consider what lies beneath this label. What, in truth, does it mean to be a psycho woman? Perhaps it's not a matter of her being psycho at all, but rather a misalignment between the self she presents and the self she feels within. One of the first signs is the distortion of identity. This woman, like many of us, clings to a version of herself that is constructed from the stories others have told her and those she tells herself. And in clinging to this illusion, she loses sight of the fluidity of being, the truth that our very nature is to evolve. In attempting to hold on to a fixed image, she becomes vulnerable to the chaos of life, and this dissonance between who she is and who she believes she must be often leads to turmoil. Another sign lies in her projections, the constant projection of blame and accusations outward, never seeing the reflection of her own fears, her own internal conflicts. In her mind, the world is full of wrongs done to her, and she becomes blind to the reality that we are all capable of perpetuating our own pain. The need for control is another aspect. A desire to manipulate the external world reflects an unconscious attempt to stabilize the internal. Yet in her attempts to control everything around her, she forgets the fundamental truth of life: we cannot control the external, only our responses to it. Control is but a poor substitute for inner peace. Emotional volatility is yet another sign. She is a person swept away by the waves of her own emotions, forgetting that emotions, like the tides, are transient. They pass. But when one becomes attached to them, defining themselves by these waves, emotional instability reigns. The fear of abandonment haunts many of us, and it often masquerades in the form of jealousy, suspicion, or frantic attachment. She who fears being left behind clings desperately to others, unaware that true love does not require such attachment. Real love exists in freedom, in the knowing that the universe will unfold as it will, and that abandonment is an illusion. At the heart of her behavior is the struggle with authenticity. Wearing a mask every day is exhausting. There is no peace in constantly performing. Yet many find themselves lost in this act, unsure of who they truly are beneath the roles they play. The search for validation becomes endless, and with it, a deepening sense of alienation. But perhaps the most dangerous sign of all is the inability to accept responsibility. The psycho woman lives in a world where everything wrong is someone else's fault, and in this world she is not free. For freedom comes only when we own our choices, when we recognize our power to shape our lives, regardless of external circumstances. We must remember, too, that love is not a transaction. It is not a tool of manipulation or control. When love becomes a desire for power over another, it is no longer love, it is a game, a dangerous one, with no real winners. There is also a compulsion to create drama. Drama becomes a substitute for meaning, a way of feeling alive when life seems dull or empty. It's a way of demanding attention, a cry for connection, but one that only deepens the isolation. Life need not be a spectacle to be meaningful, it is already meaningful in its simplicity. Boundaries, too, are an essential part of human nature. Without respect for boundaries, there is no true connection, no room for others to exist as they are. When someone fails to recognize the autonomy of others, they reveal a misunderstanding of love, a belief that connection means enmeshment. But love, in its truest form, celebrates the uniqueness of both. There is the need for constant validation. The ego is insatiable, always asking for more. It seeks approval, constantly looking outside for confirmation of its worth. Yet no external source can ever truly fill the void within. The more we look for validation, the more we lose sight of our own inherent value. And finally, we come to the destructive impulse. Sometimes destruction feels like a form of rebirth, yet it is only a cycle, a continuation of the same old patterns. Chaos and destruction do not reveal new truths, they only lead to more chaos. What do all these signs have in common? They stem from a misunderstanding of the self. We are not the roles we play, nor the stories we tell ourselves. We are not our emotions, our fears, or our desires. We are to be at peace with ourselves is to embrace the truth that we are ever-changing, ever-evolving beings. When we let go of the need to control, to manipulate, to prove our worth, we come closer to the peace we seek. In the end, a psycho woman, like all of us, is searching for something deeper. She is seeking love, authenticity, connection, and meaning. But the more she searches outwardly, the further she moves away from the peace that lies within. To heal is to turn inward, to let go of the illusions we have created about who we must be, and simply be. The illusion of identity is one of the most profound traps that the human mind falls into. It is the idea that we are something fixed, something permanent, an identity that we cling to as though it defines our essence. Yet this identity, which we hold so tightly, is not the real us. It is a collection of labels, roles, and images formed by society, our upbringing, and our experiences. We are taught to identify ourselves with our names, our jobs, our relationships, our successes, and our failures. But when we do this, we mistake a fleeting expression of life for the essence of our being. This constructed identity is not truly ours, it is a reflection of how we have been shaped by the world. From the moment we are born, we begin to accumulate labels. These labels come from others, from external forces, parents, peers, society, culture. We are taught to define ourselves by these external markers. We identify with the roles we play in life: daughter, son, friend, lover, worker, leader. We become attached to these identities, believing they are the core of who we are, forgetting that they are only temporary labels, not permanent truths. The confusion arises because we become so immersed in these identities that we forget they are just stories we tell ourselves. We start to think that the story is the truth, and in doing so, we create a prison of our own making. This story, which we call our identity, is constructed from the past. It is built from the accumulation of experiences and interpretations of those experiences, shaped by memories and judgments. The problem with this is that the past is no longer real. The past is just a collection of moments that no longer exist except in our minds. Yet we continue to identify with this past, and it becomes the lens through which we view everything, including ourselves. We forget that identity is fluid, not fixed. The truth of who we are is constantly changing, evolving, and shifting. Just as a river is never the same from one moment to the next, we too are in a constant state of flux. Our thoughts, feelings, and actions are always changing. We are not the person we were yesterday, nor will we be the person we will be tomorrow. To cling to a static identity is to deny the very nature of our being. It is to resist the flow of life and to cling to something that can never truly be grasped. The more tightly we hold on to this identity, the more we distance ourselves from our true nature, which is fluid, vast, and ever-changing. The illusion of identity causes suffering because it sets us up for disappointment. We think that if we can just hold on to a certain image of ourselves, whether it is that of a successful professional, a loving partner, or a proud parent, then we will feel secure. But the truth is, these identities are fragile. They can be taken away at any moment. Jobs are lost, relationships end, and health can fail. When we tie our worth to an identity that is built on external factors, we set ourselves up for a constant cycle of anxiety and fear. The more we try to protect and defend this constructed image of who we are, the more we separate ourselves from the deeper truth of our existence. To understand the illusion of identity is to realize that we are not the roles we play or the titles we wear. We are something far greater, something beyond words, beyond labels. We are a part of the vast, ever-changing flow of existence. Our true nature is not confined by the limitations of the identities we hold so tightly. The path to peace and freedom begins when we stop clinging to these illusions and embrace the fluidity of life itself. By letting go of the false identities we create, we allow ourselves to experience life as it truly is without the distortion of self-imposed limitations. And in doing so, we return to the wholeness and authenticity that is always present within us. The nature of projection is one of the most fascinating and intricate aspects of the human psyche. It is a psychological mechanism by which we unconsciously attribute our own feelings, desires, and unresolved conflicts onto others. This process occurs so subtly and automatically that we are often unaware of it, and yet it profoundly shapes our perception of the world and the way we relate to others. Projection is not merely about perceiving others as flawed or problematic, it is about seeing in others what we have not yet accepted or integrated within ourselves. At the core of projection is a deep discomfort with certain aspects of our own psyche. We all carry within us a variety of emotions and traits, some of which we may find difficult to accept. For instance, feelings of anger, jealousy, or insecurity are often deemed negative or undesirable by society. We are conditioned to suppress these feelings, to deny their existence within ourselves, and to maintain an image of being calm, loving, and balanced. Yet these suppressed feelings do not disappear. Instead, they remain in the unconscious, festering, and looking for an outlet. When we fail to address these feelings within ourselves, they inevitably find expression in our relationships with others. This is where projection comes in. Rather than acknowledging these uncomfortable feelings as our own, we unconsciously attribute them to the people around us. For example, if we are feeling jealous or insecure about a relationship, we might project those feelings onto our partner, accusing them of being untrustworthy or emotionally distant, even when there is no evidence to support this. Alternatively, if we harbor feelings of anger or frustration, we may see these emotions reflected in the behavior of others, perceiving them as rude, combative, or irritating, when in fact it is our own unresolved anger that is influencing our perception. Projection is also a defense mechanism. It protects us from confronting the parts of ourselves that we find difficult to accept or integrate. By projecting these traits onto others, we create a sense of distance between ourselves and the qualities we deem undesirable. This allows us to avoid the painful process of self-reflection and self-acceptance. However, this defense mechanism ultimately perpetuates suffering. When we project our internal conflicts onto others, we create tension and disconnection in our relationships. We no longer see others as they truly are, but as distorted versions of ourselves. Our perceptions become clouded, and we engage with people not as they are, but as we wish to see them. Moreover, projection can distort our understanding of reality. When we project our unresolved feelings onto others, we create an illusion of who they are. This leads to misunderstandings, false judgments, and unrealistic expectations. We begin to see people through the lens of our own inner turmoil, rather than as complex, multifaceted individuals. This can lead to conflict and disappointment, as we impose our expectations and judgments onto others, only to be disillusioned when they do not meet our projections. The key to overcoming projection is self-awareness and self-acceptance. By learning to recognize when we are projecting our own unresolved issues onto others, we can begin to break the cycle. This requires a willingness to confront the parts of ourselves that we have hidden or denied. It involves acknowledging our feelings, both the light and dark aspects of our nature, and accepting them as part of our whole being. Only by accepting ourselves in our entirety can we begin to see others clearly and interact with them from a place of understanding and compassion. Projection, in its essence, is a mirror. It shows us the parts of ourselves that we are unwilling to face. When we begin to turn that mirror inward and see ourselves for who we truly are, free from judgment and denial, we can begin to release the distortions we place onto others. In doing so, we free ourselves from the cycle of projection and open the door to deeper connection, both with ourselves and with the people around us. It is only by accepting the truth of our own nature that we can begin to perceive the truth in others. Emotional volatility is a state of being where one's emotions fluctuate wildly and unpredictably, often causing inner turmoil and external disruption. It is the experience of being swept away by intense feelings, where one moment you may feel elated, and the next you may descend into despair, anger, or frustration. This emotional turbulence can arise from external triggers or from internal unresolved conflicts, and it often leads to a sense of instability and confusion. While all humans experience emotions, emotional volatility occurs when these feelings are not fully processed or understood, and instead they overwhelm the individual, dominating their thoughts, behaviors, and relationships. At its core, emotional volatility stems from an attachment to emotions as if they are permanent states rather than temporary experiences. Emotions, by nature, are fleeting, they come and go like waves in the ocean. But when one becomes attached to a particular emotion, believing that it defines who they are, it becomes much harder to let go. This attachment to emotions creates a cycle of intensity. One becomes trapped in the belief that emotions must be fully felt in the moment, not realizing that the intensity will eventually pass. The inability to recognize the transient nature of emotions causes one to react impulsively, often without thought, leading to dramatic shifts in mood and behavior. When someone is emotionally volatile, their sense of self is often entwined with their feelings. If their emotions are positive, they may feel on top of the world, believing they are worthy and powerful. But when those feelings turn negative, they may feel worthless, unlovable, or helpless. This creates a fragile sense of identity, one that rises and falls with the tides of emotional states. In this state, external events such as a small disagreement with a partner, a minor setback at work, or a perceived insult can trigger disproportionate emotional reactions. These reactions feel all-encompassing, as though they are the only truth, leading to actions or decisions that are based on temporary emotional states rather than clear, rational thinking. The reason for this volatility often lies in unresolved emotional wounds or unprocessed trauma. Painful experiences from the past, whether from childhood, relationships, or life events, can leave emotional scars. These unresolved issues lie beneath the surface, and when triggered by something in the present, they cause intense emotional reactions. The person may not even be fully aware of the root cause, but the emotional response can feel overwhelming and uncontrollable. These patterns of reactivity repeat themselves because they have not been fully explored or healed. The emotional volatility is an expression of the inner chaos created by these unhealed wounds as the person constantly relives past hurts in the present moment. Furthermore, emotional volatility is also exacerbated by a lack of emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is the ability to manage and respond to emotional experiences in a healthy, constructive way. For those who are emotionally volatile, this skill may be underdeveloped. They may not know how to self-soothe or process emotions in a balanced way. And instead, they may be reactive or overwhelmed by their feelings. This can lead to destructive behavior, whether it's withdrawing from others, lashing out in anger, or engaging in self-destructive habits. The inability to regulate one's emotions can cause significant distress, not just for the individual but also for those around them, as relationships become strained and communication breaks down. The key to overcoming emotional volatility lies in self-awareness, self-compassion, and emotional growth. The first step is recognizing when emotional intensity takes over and learning to create space between the emotion and the reaction. This allows the individual to step back and observe their feelings without becoming engulfed by them. Understanding that emotions are not permanent states but temporary experiences can help reduce the fear of being overwhelmed. Cultivating emotional regulation through mindfulness therapy or other tools can help build a more grounded relationship with one's emotions, allowing them to be experienced without becoming consumed by them. As we learn to accept and understand our emotional landscape, we find that the storms of emotional volatility begin to calm, and we can navigate life with greater balance and peace. The fear of abandonment is a deeply ingrained emotional experience that touches the core of human vulnerability. It is an anxiety that arises from the belief that those we rely on for love, connection, and security will eventually leave us. This fear can manifest in countless ways, from feelings of insecurity in relationships to an overwhelming dread that we are unworthy of love. At its root, the fear of abandonment is the fear of losing the very thing that gives us a sense of identity and belonging, human connection. It stems from the fear that we are not enough, that we are somehow flawed or inadequate, and that we will be cast aside in favor of someone else or simply left alone. The fear of abandonment often originates in childhood, where early experiences of neglect, rejection, or loss can leave emotional scars. A child who experiences the absence of a caregiver, whether physical or emotional, learns that attachment and security are fragile. This child may grow up with the unconscious belief that love is conditional and that others cannot be relied upon to remain constant. In adulthood, these early experiences shape how one views relationships, love, and trust. If abandonment was a theme in early life, it can become a lens through which every relationship is viewed, a belief that love is something to be feared, not embraced, because it might be taken away at any moment. As adults, this fear continues to influence our behavior in subtle and not so subtle ways. Those who fear abandonment may cling too tightly to others, seeking constant reassurance and validation. They may become excessively needy or dependent, feeling that their worth is tied to the presence and attention of others. This often stems from a belief that if they do not secure this attention, they will be left alone. They might become overly possessive, constantly questioning their partner's loyalty or commitment, even in the absence of evidence that would justify such concerns. This anxiety often leads to actions that push others away, creating the very thing they fear most: abandonment. Alternatively, those with a fear of abandonment may build walls around themselves, avoiding intimacy altogether. They may keep others at a distance, afraid to open up or be vulnerable because they fear that once they allow someone in, that person will eventually leave. This avoidance can create a sense of isolation, but it also protects them from the pain of losing someone they care about. Paradoxically, this behavior often reinforces the fear they wish to avoid, as it prevents them from forming meaningful, lasting connections. The fear of abandonment is not always rational. It is often based on deeply ingrained insecurities and emotional wounds that distort perception. A partner's temporary distance or a friend's preoccupation with their own life may be interpreted as signs of impending rejection, even when no such threat exists. This distorted thinking can create cycles of anxiety, jealousy, and emotional instability that erode the trust needed for healthy relationships. The person who fears abandonment may misinterpret signals, jump to conclusions, and create unnecessary drama, all of which alienate others and reinforce their belief that they will inevitably be left behind. To address the fear of abandonment, it is essential to first recognize that it is rooted in a fear of loss of control. The need to control others' behavior or emotions is often an unconscious attempt to protect oneself from perceived abandonment. Yet control is an illusion. No one can fully control the actions or feelings of others, and true connection and intimacy require a level of trust and vulnerability. Healing from the fear of abandonment requires working through the past emotional wounds that gave rise to this fear. It involves recognizing one's inherent worth and learning that love is not conditional on staying or leaving, but on mutual respect and understanding. Ultimately, the fear of abandonment can be overcome by learning to cultivate self-love, self-trust, and emotional resilience. By understanding that our sense of worth does not depend on others' presence or approval, we can learn to love ourselves unconditionally. We must also learn to embrace the ebb and flow of relationships, understanding that people come in and out of our lives for various reasons, and that our value is not diminished by their departure. In doing so, we break free from the grip of abandonment and learn to create relationships that are based on trust, respect, and mutual care rather than fear and insecurity. A desire for power over love is a complex and often destructive force that emerges when individuals seek to control or manipulate love rather than experience it as an open, mutual exchange. This desire for power manifests in the belief that love can be harnessed, dominated, or even used as a tool to maintain control over others. The desire for power over love often stems from an underlying fear of vulnerability and insecurity, where the individual seeks to protect themselves from the uncertainties and risks inherent in true emotional intimacy. Instead of experiencing love as a force that flows freely between individuals, they attempt to shape and possess it, seeing it as something they can control or manipulate to serve their own needs. At the root of this desire is a deep-seated fear of being powerless or helpless. Power, in this case, is equated with safety and security. When someone feels emotionally vulnerable, love can be perceived as a potential threat, something that, if given freely and unconditionally, could lead to emotional loss or pain in response. They attempt to control love as a way to protect themselves from this perceived risk. They may attempt to control a partner's emotions, actions, or choices, seeking to dictate the terms of the relationship rather than allowing it to unfold naturally. This desire for power is not limited to romantic relationships, but can also manifest in friendships, familial bonds, or even professional relationships. For example, someone who seeks power over love may try to manipulate a partner's affections through guilt, fear, or dependency. They may create situations where the other person feels obligated to love them or feel guilty if they don't meet certain demands. These tactics often arise from an unconscious belief that love can be coerced or earned through control. However, such attempts at control often undermine the very foundation of love, which thrives on mutual respect, trust, and freedom. Love, when it becomes a means to an end or a tool of manipulation, loses its purity and authenticity, and the relationship becomes centered on power struggles rather than genuine connection. This desire for power over love can also arise from past experiences of rejection, betrayal, or emotional trauma. People who have been hurt in the past may develop a belief that love is something that can be lost or taken away. They may build walls around their hearts, seeking to control love as a means of avoiding future pain.